And so focusing on technology in the broadest sense is really important in developing our workforce. So we support programs like Zip Code Wilmington, which is a fantastic program that brings young people, mostly young 20-something-year-old, who are in a career maybe where they're not satisfied or certainly not doing technology. They sign up, they have a certain aptitude, they sign up for this program, and in several months they're placed in some of the employers like the large bank that I referred to, making $60,000 or $70,000 a year. I hear from employers all the time that some of their biggest challenges are finding employees that have the skills, often IT skills, to run their operations. And so as we reach out to attract employers to our state, to keep the companies here that we have growing, companies like JP Chase, which is up to about 10,000 employees in our state, we need to make sure that our workforce is trained. And so educating our young people, getting them interested along the way in technology. We passed legislation, and I signed legislation last year that requires every high school and charter school in our state to offer at least one computer science class.
That's great.
Supporting programs at the University of Delaware, Delaware State University, and Delaware Technical and Community College that educate our young people with technology skills. Supporting places like the Mill. Just this week, James, you joined me as we signed a new executive order making our commitment to the Open Data Council, which essentially is opening up data that the state has to the public in an effort to create transparency in our government, as well as having people use data that is available to help us address and solve some of the problems, some of the more serious problems that we face in the state. We're already, as you know, working on solving some of the social and educational problems that we have here in the city of Wilmington and across the state of Delaware by better using big data sources to coordinate the services that we provide families and children to strengthen those families. So tonight we're going to talk about that. Please type your questions in. We're going to answer questions as you submit them, and I'm delighted to be here with James Collins and to engage all of you tonight talking about Delaware's economy and technology. And with that, James, I turn it over to you to make some opening comments before we take questions.
Well, thanks, Governor. It's great to be here with you and all your Facebook friends. Thank you all for joining us. It's so interesting that this is the Governor's third Facebook Live. It just demonstrates how technology is changing the way we communicate, we do business, and as a government, how we deliver services. So I'm super excited to be here to talk about the things that are going on in the state.
And we reach so many more people, James, than if we were to have a town hall meeting at one of the high schools like we normally do in the old days, where maybe 100 people would show up or 200. We've touched and had thousands of people that have tuned in and will tune in tonight. So it's a really effective way to do our jobs and reaching out to the public that we serve.
I agree. I think technology is changing healthcare, it's changing transportation, it's changing, just like you said, the bank is turning into a technology company. It's because citizens have an expectation to do business in a certain way. They expect to be able to do business on their terms, when they want to, where they want to, and from whatever device they want to. And so businesses and government alike are really evolving the services that we deliver to incorporate technology and deliver them in that way. And that, when you do that, the considerations are cybersecurity, broadband access, privacy, all of those things come into play. And so I look forward
Lots of new issues implicated in all that, right?
Definitely. Your last town hall was about healthcare.
Right.
You think about telemedicine, the Internet of Things, all of those things factor in and how technology is changing things. So I look forward tonight to talking with you and taking questions.
And you mentioned healthcare. You know, one of the more successful initiatives that the state has had over the last, 15 or 20 years is something called the Delaware Health Information Network.
Yes.
And of course, it's a great tool that helps providers provide better services to get better health outcomes for the people of our state and the various patients of those providers. But it has significant implications with respect to the security of of that information. Of course, confidentiality with respect to health status and health condition is extremely important. And so there's a lot of issues that maybe you wouldn't think about that are implicated whenever you talk about
it's a
kinds
perfect example of the value of data sharing.
Right.
You know, you've got all of these sources from labs and other sources where a practitioner can see the overall picture for their patient and deliver better quality care. So I'm glad you brought up the data.
So I mentioned a minute ago open data. One of the questions that we have is how does open data help us? And I think really fundamentally in two ways. By providing open data or access to government data to the public, it creates greater transparency with the citizens that we serve. So a lot of very interested citizens want to know about air quality monitoring.
Yes,
they want to know about traffic conditions on various highways. If you think about some of the DelDOT applications, they have incredible information and data that's available in terms of construction projects and traffic and backup and those kinds of things. Lots of very practical and pragmatic things, and then of course issues that are a little bit more complicated in terms of how we address certain social problems. How do we educate our students better? How do we address and approach children with certain disabilities using data? How do we strengthen families that may have interactions with different?
Sure.
And I think big data, open data, both creates greater transparency and therefore confidence and trust among the people that we serve, and also provides an opportunity to solve some of these problems more effectively. I think our challenge, your challenge as our CIO of this state, Chief Information Officer, is to make sure that those data sources are secure, make sure we're protecting our systems from cyber attacks. I'm sure we'll talk about that, and helping other of our colleagues use the data that you know a little bit more about in solving the problems that in areas where they have more expertise.
Yeah, I'm really happy you said that. The one piece is, I mean, you always say we're accountable to the citizens, and so this is a way, sharing this data is a way to demonstrate what we're doing, how we're spending the money. The checkbook is on the open data portal, and then the next step is providing services to them through that data. As you mentioned, the environmental data, the transportation data that's being provided to them. We provide FirstMap. We provide all kinds of geographic information system data, GIS data. You can look up school districts. You can find childcare. There's all types of maps and everything on the portal. So lots of services that are helpful to people.
And then there's the application GeoSwap that we partnered with in the Division of Tourism and the Parks, which basically provides information about parks that are available to folks and other activities, restaurants, historical sites up and down their state. It's amazing how many lifelong Delawareans haven't visited places like John Dickinson Mansion. I was there this week, and I'm amazed with the history around John Dickinson, one of the most important of our founding fathers. And of course we have wonderful parks up and down the state. I was at Delaware Seashore State Park just the other day as we lit up one of the World War II era towers down there. Really a beautiful setting. And GeoSwap is an app that allows people to, for different places of interest in parks and whatnot, to come up as they travel up and down our state. What kind of question do you have there, James?
Sure, we have a question from Frank Payton. He said, what are we doing to get high-speed internet access to rural areas? So this is an area where we've, as a state, put in quite a bit of work over a number of years. And I totally understand this question, because broadband access is essentially, we need to treat it like a utility these days. I mean, you wouldn't build a house without water or electricity. I think broadband access is starting to, if not already, move into that category. So some of the things that we've done over the years is to expand the network across the state, which has actually made Delaware a leader in the nation as it relates to broadband access and speeds. But we still have work to do.
So one of the challenges, and it, James, you can help me here, is getting that broadband access to some of our small towns downstate. I've talked to the mayors of Seaford and Laurel and some of those communities that don't have the kind of broadband that they would need to attract any kind of employer these days would require that kind of, certainly any kind of call center or that type of a business. You need that broadband access. I know our partners with Sussex County government actually made an appropriation of, I think, $1 million or so to partner with us in bringing broadband to certain areas of Sussex County, and it's an area that we're working on. We passed legislation working with the Department of Transportation to do small cell extensions in the DelDOT right-of-way, which will enable us, I guess, to improve receptivity in certain areas across our state. So some really interesting things happen there. We've got another question from Tom Stevenson. This is a great question. Can we take a version of Open Bracket into our schools? What a great idea. Let me explain briefly what Open Bracket is. It's really a coding IT competition that has been started by Ben DePont and several other folks. They bring in some of the best coders across the country to almost like a NCAA basketball bracket challenge.
I love that.
And you have to qualify to be part of the bracket, and then they create challenges, problems for these experts to solve. And I went down to visit them, James, last year when they had their challenge down at the Queen. And they had one fellow, they said, the question was, you have 1 million records. How do you find the false records within this universe of computer records? And somebody came up with a program that identified that in like 15 minutes. So they have that kind of challenge. So the question is, could we do something like that? How about an open bracket challenge at one of our high schools? You know, I think the question would be the level of ability of the high school students, but certainly that kind of thing. We did have, when I was a member of Congress, we did have a challenge similar to that. It was a congressionally sponsored technology challenge where we put out a challenge among the high schools and high school students across our state, and they were to come up with a technology solution to it.
I think House Bill 15 really lays the groundwork for those types of things to happen, because when those fundamental skills are being taught in the schools, then it'll foster those types of competitions and things like that. So I think it really lays the groundwork. I've had some meetings recently with companies like Apple and Microsoft, and they're very interested in doing those types of programs as well. So I think in the very near future, we're going to have those types of things infused into our education environment. I think House Bill 15 really lays the groundwork for that.
All the different things that we can do to encourage young people in high school, in college. You know, there's a cyber challenge each summer that the University of Delaware sponsors for high school students. I've been down to visit that. It's really a successful program, again, getting young people engaged. We also have a program to get some of our young female students interested in, look, the future.
Tomorrow is the last day for females to sign up for that. So go to didyouknow.delaware.gov if you want to sign up for that NSA program for girls in cyber. Sorry to interrupt you.
There you go, girls out there. And if you're interested in cyber, if you're interested in IT, make sure you sign up for that. I think there's another question that's come in there.
I feel like I didn't fully answer Frank Payton's question, so I want to circle back to that, because so the state has invested economic development funds to get enough fiber infrastructure moving in the state, installed in the state. And so what that did, it actually took fiber from Wilmington all the way down to Georgetown. We know we have areas, rural areas in western Kent County as well as Sussex County that either don't have access or there needs to be more competition to bring about affordability. So when I first got into this role, I was like, hey, why don't we use wireless to deploy? And my team said, good idea, except we don't have enough infrastructure to jump off of. So we used a grant opportunity to incentivize vendors to build out in those rural areas. And now $1 million has actually turned into $30 million of fiber investment in those areas. So that's allowed us to move on to the phase that we're at right now, where we're doing the wireless pilots. We're doing a wireless pilot in Marydale and in Seaford. And the promise of that technology, if it proves out, and we'll know within the next couple months, we will be able to partner with Sussex County, and I think that we can eliminate the rural broadband issue in the very near future.
Well, that's a key, because this is fundamentally a private, sector responsibility in terms of doing that. And obviously the government has done that with respect to schools and some of our facilities, but partnering with the private sector, creating some incentives for them to go into places where they've not laid fiber and fiber networks is important. So that's really a good thing. We've got another question here from Tommy Jones, and those rest of you who have tuned in tonight to this Facebook Live session, please type in your questions for us. This one is, do employers themselves have any obligation to contribute to the training of their employees? And the answer is absolutely, and they do. We mentioned zip code Wilmington is not we do make an investment as a state into zip code Wilmington, but fundamentally is funded through participation of the private sector companies that benefit. So they make funds available for students. They commit to hiring those students as interns, and I think 90% of the graduates of zip code Wilmington go in and get hired by the sponsors of this program. It is very much a public-private responsibility. You can bet that the banks here in our state, upon other large companies, smaller companies, mid-sized companies, make pretty significant investments in training their employees in the specific systems that they run. Of course, obviously, they're also looking for trained employees as they move into an area. We have had the experience of the sweepstakes for the Amazon second headquarters. Of course, we had an application unsuccessful, but it was a good opportunity to consider and work on the kinds of things mostly driven by workforce, mostly driven by the talent, the technology talent in a particular geographic area that companies like Amazon and others are looking for. Of course, we have two big Amazon installations, the distribution center outside of Newcastle and the fulfillment center in Middletown, and so hundreds, thousands of employees with Amazon with those facilities. So thanks, Tommy Jones, for your question.
We have a question from Julie Caputo. It says, the criminal justice system needs more efficient use of technology. Are there plans for an upgrade? So I would say I get an opportunity to work closely with the Chief Justice and his team. And I can tell you the Chief Justice is laser focused on leveraging technology to improve the criminal justice system. And I can tell you that they have a number of modernization efforts underway that we're getting an opportunity to partner with them on some of them. And they actually have some pretty innovative things that they're working on as well. I don't want to get out ahead of them, but I just wanted to assure you they are working on modernizing their technology.
And of course, James, you and I have talked quite a bit in the last year about, and it was part of the independent review report of the incident at James Vaughn Prison, about the need for better systems in our Department of Corrections. Key to better programming and better security in our level 5 facilities, in our prisons, is to better understand the risk associated with each of those inmates. And so the classification system, which essentially is how we determine what that risk is an important component of that. And of course, that's an electronic system. I know that we've talked a lot about how to improve that system. Certainly a recommendation of the interim report this week, important to point out, was the 1-year anniversary of the murder of Lieutenant Stephen Floyd at James Vaughn Prison. We had a number of memorials this week, and our hearts and prayers still go out to his family. But the best way that we can honor his memory is to implement some of the recommendations that have been made to improve the conditions in those facilities, and technology and the IT system that the classification system is part of is an important part of that effort.
I agree. Both of those questions remind me of the GEAR initiative that you put in place,
right,
which is the Government Efficiency and Accountability Review Board. The Chief Justice sits on that board, and so they're working on more efficiencies, and we're also doing IT centralization. Just like in the private sector, they've had to centralize their IT to be more efficient and responsive to their customers. And in the government, we're actually doing the same thing to actually be able to deliver digital government for the citizens of Delaware. So this reminds me of both of those initiatives.
Great stuff. So another question from Melinda Girardi. We need to amp up our math, science, computer technology, and engineering. Do this in our schools and colleges will make us more competitive. Not really a question, but a very, very true statement. As I mentioned at the outset, in my opening remarks, if we're going to be competitive economically as a state, we have to do a better job educating our young people in the early grades and elementary school, get them ready to go to kindergarten and first grade with early child education programs. The state has made huge investments in those programs over the last 8 years. We need to make sure that our children are able to read at grade level at grade 3 and do math at grade level at grades 5 and 10 to create that foundation that's necessary to go on to computer science work in the future. What we know is that the majority of the jobs in the future are going to be jobs that require technical skills, there are jobs in information technology, science and technology generally. So getting our young people interested and prepared is incredibly important, and the states and the geographic areas that are going to win in this new economy are those that are going to have the strongest workforces. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is for all of us to make sure that all our children get the kind of educational foundation that they need, that we have programs that incentivize and interest them in science, math, science, and technology, have support programs like Zip Code Wilmington. I believe with Zip Code and with the bracket challenges and other things happening with the needs of our banks and other large employers, that we can be a real IT technology hub. We already are to a certain extent, James.
There's a lot going on that I have to mention. Within the last couple of years, the Padua Academy, they won a national cybersecurity award for their team when it competed in cybersecurity. And we went to the school, and I'm so glad you mentioned open bracket, because I think we got to get to a point where we're celebrating STEM achievements just as much as we do sporting achievements. So we went to the school and celebrated with them. I know that Del Tech has got not only computer science, but programming. They're teaching folks how to do applications. Wilmington has a cybersecurity center of the University of Wilmington.
Wilmington University, James, as I understand, have an excellently rated cybersecurity program, which is, again, generating graduates and young people with the kind of skills that these employers are looking for.
Same thing at the University of Delaware. I was at Delaware State University recently, and they're teaching data scientists, which is one of the biggest professions that'll be in demand going forward. So there's a lot of things already happening in the state, but there's always more that we can do. I have a question here from Jen Havel, and thanks everybody for sending in the questions. This would be kind of weird if you weren't doing that, so thank you. So what does FirstNet mean for the first responder community? So let me just kind of give a little bit of explanation of what FirstNet is for those that may not have heard of it. FirstNet actually came out of, and I'm sure you worked on this when you were in Congress, Governor, came out of 9/11.
Right.
And so what happened when that terrorist attack happened, the first responders couldn't use the cell networks to communicate with data or voice. So the FirstNet program was created to make sure that in times of emergency that first responders would have preemption on cellular networks. And so it's a federal program, and they have selected a vendor to build a nationwide first responder network. And in late December, the governor opted Delaware into the program, which actually authorizes FirstNet to build out a system in Delaware that's interoperable with the rest of the nation for first responders to utilize. The next phase of that will be, our first responder community will have to evaluate that system to make a determination whether or not it meets their needs, so they can respond when we call, they come.
Well, I remember well 9/11. I was wasn't long after I had been elected lieutenant governor, and of course we were having a meeting that bright and sunny morning, and after the planes crashed into the World Trade Centers, there was a lot of confusion because there wasn't a lot of communication. A lot of communication networks were overloaded, and of course it gave rise to what you were talking about. So I have a question. Jim Myran, who is actually works with Gear, you mentioned Gear, he's our executive director. He says IT is a large and growing field. Are there specific areas of IT that students and IT professionals should pursue? Well, we've talked about two tonight in talking to Ben DuPont, who's one of the main founders of the Zip Code Wilmington and open bracket competition that we've been talking about. He believes that Delaware can be a real coding hub as we attract new talent, as IT or as Zip Code continues to grow and expand and produce more graduates, as our companies, our banks, and other large employers and mid-sized employers have IT demands that require coding expertise. He believes that we can really become a coding hub. The other, I think, area of expertise that we have is the cybersecurity. We've talked about it in terms of Wilmington University. University of Delaware has a great cybersecurity program. They have the various programs for the high school students to get the young people interested and involved. And so I think that's an area. We have our Delaware National Guard, which has a cybersecurity unit there with some great expertise. I think those two in particular, James, I don't know if you have other areas where you think we can be a leader.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, because it sounds like the question was what areas of technology students can pursue, is, and parents, I hope you hear this too, there's virtually zero unemployment in the tech space.
Well, there's a demand for tech workers is what it is.
I did a search on one job site yesterday, and it identified 2,400 jobs in Delaware, and they ranged the gamut of IT. It reminds me of the program that's right here in Wilmington as well, IT Works, and they train basic IT skills for people to work at help desk and in desktop support. There's plenty of jobs in that field as well. There's all types of engineering jobs available, and probably a couple other up-and-coming jobs are business analysts as well as data scientists. So those are some of the most sought-after IT fields.
This is an interesting question, James. I'll be interested in your take on it. It's a question that comes in from Nikki Abaglen, if I get that right, Nikki. If I don't, I'm sorry. Can you offer more learning opportunities for those in their 40s and 50s? We need to be more valuable to employers. My own sense, I kind of alluded to this a minute ago, is that employers spend a fair amount of money, we do as a state, bringing our employees along and making various training available. Zip Code, we've been talking about that coding school, focuses mostly on a younger age group than 40s and 50s. But I think the question is right on point in terms of the need to involve and engage employees at every age level. The fact of the matter is that people are living longer, working longer, and that our workforces are aging, whatever business folks are in. So providing training and support to employers to help them move along in their careers and be more productive, whether it's in government or large corporations, is an important part of what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people of all ages, some people switch careers, join some of the training programs that we've talked about, getting education at Dell Tech. There's even online self-paced programs where folks can learn basic IT skills. They can become part of a help desk. They can do desktop support. And I've seen people switch careers at all different ages in their life. And like I said, there's zero unemployment, so there's the demand.
The huge demand in the workplace, that's for sure. And as we reach out and talk to employers that are interested in locating in our state, that's probably the first question that they ask is, what's the quality of the workforce look like? Where can I get IT professionals? What about engineers and employees with degrees in math and science? And increasingly, the jobs that are going to be available in the workforce are going to be those kind of jobs. One of the biggest concerns that I have, and it's a challenge for all of us, is that with self-driving automobiles, with technology kind of taking over a lot of the functions that previously people did, you know, there are going to be fewer and fewer of those types of jobs that don't really require a high level of training and education and expertise, and you really have to meet the requirements of citizens in your state that have different skill levels. You need a whole range of jobs, from jobs that don't require a lot of skills and training to jobs that require a lot of education and training.
I feel like my newest colleague in the cabinet, Saran Cade, would chase me down if I didn't say to that last question they should definitely check with the Department of Labor on some employment and training opportunities as well.
Absolutely.
So I've got a question here from Tommy Jones. What steps are being taken to counter the FCC's gutting of net neutrality?
Well, that's a big issue.
Yeah, that is. Tommy, thanks for that question. I need to just, for those that may not understand what net neutrality is, just a real basic explanation of it is it's a principle that says that all internet traffic is to be treated the same. So no matter what the website is, no matter what the internet service provider is or the ISP, that they have to treat all internet traffic the same, similar to other utilities like electricity and water, and they have the same mandates. And so the FCC...
So no preferential arrangements for big users or certain companies.
I mean, that principle really allows just about anyone to leverage the internet, to start a company, to expand the company, to to do all types of things.
It's the idea that this is a public utility, right, that should be open and available on an equal basis to everybody.
Right. So the recent FCC regulatory action pulled the internet out of public utility status, which opens the door for companies to be able to treat internet traffic differently. The governor has been very clear that he supports net neutrality, as do I. The Attorney General has joined in a lawsuit with 20 other states opposing the regulatory change, and we're talking with and meeting with our major ISP providers across the state to do everything, make sure we're doing everything we can to keep the internet open and fair.
And the ISP providers would be?
Like Comcast, AT&T, Verizon.
So the big providers. So I have a question, James, from Christina Kelly. It's a little bit, it's relevant to our conversation about state employees, but her question is, are there discussions about increasing pay for workers in our state? And obviously, just in January, I submitted my proposed budget, and that budget did include a $1,000 pay increase for state employees, a different structure, 2% pay increase for teachers and school district employees, just because their contracts are a little bit different. So this is something that we thought was necessary. It goes back to the question of cultivating a quality workforce and making sure that you have good employees. We have a number of our employees that are eligible for retirement over the next 5 years, and so we need to attract people to come in and fill those positions, and so we need to be competitive with other private sector employers so we can get good people working here for state government. One of the challenges that we have in compensating our state employees fairly is just the demands on the state budget and the limitations in revenue that we've had over the last, say, 10 or 12 years. So our budget is a little bit out of whack in the sense that our expenses are going up at a rate greater than our revenue. And that's fundamentally because expenses like healthcare, about 30-some% of our budget is healthcare, either the state's portion of Medicaid, which is health care services for low-income families, people with disabilities, and then elderly citizens who are in a long-term care facility. That's about $800 million, in addition to the federal side of that, which is another $800 million roughly. And then for state employees and retirees, another $750 to $800 million. And when those expenses are growing at 2 or 3 times the growth of your revenue, it crowds out some of the other investment, including investments in pay increases for employees. But this year in our budget, we've got a proposal for a $1,000 increase for state employees.
Governor, I would just add to that what seems to me to be happening is the resources, haven't been growing, but the demand for service has been growing during that same time period. And we've had to, there's a lot of people across agencies all across the state that are trying to leverage technology to actually close that gap and still deliver the services that the citizens
Well, and the state
expect.
has done that, interestingly. When I came in last year, we were confronted with a $400 million deficit, as you know. And we looked back over what had happened over the last 8 years, and to meet that disconnect that I talked about a minute ago, the previous administration and legislature had reduced overall state employment by, I think, 800 employees. At the same time, the number of school district employees had increased by a couple thousand to meet the increase in the number of students, and particularly students with learning disabilities. And so that's the challenge that we face in balancing that budget.
Got it. So we have a question here from Jen Bradford. She says, can you talk more about the Open Data Initiative? Absolutely, Jen. Thanks for the question. So
James can talk all night about that
I
Open
love
Data
this question.
Initiative, I think.
The governor's going to cut me off, I know it. But so, what we were trying to do initially was there was data across the state that was in systems that wasn't available unless you wrote someone a letter or an email and asked for it, and if you knew where to find it. Then there was data that was publicly available, but you had to know which agency had the data and where their website was and to get the data on their website. And so what we tried to do as an initial step is to bring all of that data into a single portal where you can go and you can search for the data that you want, and it's available in multiple formats. You can actually generate reports, you can generate maps from it, you can download the information. There's people that are downloading the information and actually using it in commercial applications. So I can show you better than I can tell you. So if you go to the website that'll appear on your screen here in a second, opendata.delaware.gov, and you'll be able to see what I've just talked about.
Good job, James.
I tried to keep it short.
No, I know you could talk all night. The fact of the matter is that we've run out of time for questions tonight in this Facebook Live Town Hall meeting. I want to thank you, James. I want to thank you for your leadership as the state's Chief Information Officer running that large agency, the Department of Technology and Information, helping us become a leader in technology as a state. You know, that's, I think, part and parcel of building a strong technology-based economy. I mean, people look to the state to provide leadership there, and so all the different things that we do, from the open data portal to support for the coding programs in the private sector, to all the different investments that we're making in broadband expansion and partnerships that we're creating there, goes to help us meet that challenge. Before we sign off, I would like to just make one mention about, a lot of people have been writing in today about their concerns over the school shooting that occurred in Parkland, Florida yesterday. Obviously, our hearts ache for those families involved. And a lot of the comments have been, is there anything that we can do? And of course, when I look at a situation like that, one of the things that comes immediately to mind is that we can do a better job. I think we don't do as good a job as we can in enforcing the laws that we have on our books with respect to weapons. We have laws that prevent felons from getting access to weapons. We closed some loopholes with respect to background checks and that a couple years ago. There's a piece of legislation that we endorsed about a month ago, the Beau Biden Gun Violence Prevention Act, which simply would prevent someone who's diagnosed with a serious mental health condition from getting access to weapons. It appears that that was the situation that gave rise to this horrible incident in Florida. Certainly we can pray for the families involved and to continue to work on those issues here in our own way here in the state of Delaware. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Facebook Live tonight. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for following us. And have a good night and a good rest of your week and an enjoyable weekend.